One Star Trek Voyager episode borrowed two terrifying things from TNG. One of Star Trek Voyager Season 4's creepiest episodes drew inspiration from Star Trek The Next Generation. Voyager Season 4 was arguably where the show began to pick up momentum, releasing more consistently good episodes than those with mixed or bad reviews. This was likely thanks to the addition of 7 of 9, Jerry Ryan, and Voyager's cast of characters, and the creative team hitting their stride and beginning to feel like a cohesive unit. Whatever the reason, Season 4 contained some great episodes that are ranked among some of Voyager's best. One of Voyager's Season 4's better episodes was Scientific Method, which had a decidedly unsettling premise. During the episode, the USS Voyager's crew began acting strangely and eventually discovered that they were being experimented on by unnamed aliens who could pass invisibly on the ship. After unsuccessfully attempting to get the aliens to back off, Captain Janeway, Kate Mulgrew, was forced to fly the ship on a dangerous mission between two binary pulsars to intimidate the uninvited guest into leaving. The premise of Scientific Method was terrifying, but it also wasn't a new concept to the Star Trek timeline. Star Trek Voyager's Scientific Method combines two of TNG's scary episodes. Scientific Method was essentially a mashup of two of Star Trek TNG's scariest episodes, Schisms and Where Silence Has Lease. The main plot of the Voyager episode was most closely related to Schisms, since both episodes featured their respective crews being experimented upon by unseen aliens who had managed to infiltrate the ship without anyone knowing. The methods of infiltration differed, but the result was the same, and the moments of reveal when each crew realized what was being done to them were equally horrifying. In terms of Where Silence Has Lease, Scientific Method has the same ending. Both Captain Janeway and Captain Picard, Patrick Stewart, were forced to put their ship and crew in mortal danger to get the alien that was toying with them to back off. Janeway accomplished this by flying Voyager into the pulsars, while Picard activated the USS Enterprise D's self-destruct. Voyager borrowing from TNG wasn't an uncommon occurrence, and similarities between episodes from Star Trek's 1990s era signaled the interconnectedness of the franchise. However, in Scientific Method, Voyager did one significant thing differently than TNG. One big difference between Star Trek Voyager's Scientific Method and TNG Scientific Method's alien villains ended up being a lot less scary than TNG's for one important reason: they were humanoid. In both Schisms and Where Silence Has Lease, the aliens the Enterprise D crew encountered were decidedly non-human, making them a lot more unsettling. The Schisms aliens in particular were terrifyingly non-humanoid figures with unclear motives, and the being in Where Silence Has Lease, although able to communicate intelligently, had the advantage of appearing as no more than a large face in space, making it much less relatable. In contrast, once they had been exposed, the aliens experimenting on Voyager's crew in Scientific Method weren't nearly as scary. Their motives may have been unpleasant and a commentary on unethical experimental practices, but they ended up packing much less of a punch than something like the beings in Schisms. This didn't make the Star Trek Voyager episode any less interesting, but it did stop Scientific Method from devolving into true nightmare fuel. Writing a 6,500-word essay with a theme like Star Trek Voyager episode borrowed two terrifying things from The Next Generation requires breaking down complex ideas, identifying the thematic and narrative connections between Star Trek Voyager and Star Trek The Next Generation, TNG, and analyzing the terrifying elements borrowed between the two shows. I'll aim to focus on key narrative elements, thematic links, and possibly the shared horror or frightening themes. Here's how the outline of the essay could go. Introduction, background on Star Trek, The Next Generation, TNG, and Star Trek Voyager. Both are iconic series in the Star Trek franchise, set within the same universe but with different narrative focuses. Overview of the borrowing between Voyager and TNG. Many concepts and storylines from TNG influenced Voyager, and certain episodes of Voyager directly borrowed ideas from TNG. Thesis statement. This essay will explore two terrifying elements that Star Trek Voyager borrowed from TNG. 1. The horrifying theme of loss of control through external influences, mind control, and parasitic beings. And 2. Existential threats that challenge the very survival and sanity of the crew. 1. The context of Star Trek Voyager and The Next Generation. 1.1 The legacy of TNG, TNG's impact. TNG redefined Star Trek for a new generation, introducing complex, morally ambiguous storylines, deep philosophical questions, and terrifying encounters that pushed the boundaries of what Sky-Fi could do on television. Examples of horror in TNG specific episodes like The Best of Both Worlds, The Borg, Conspiracy, Parasitic Creatures, and Schisms, Alien Abductions, introduced horror elements that left lasting impressions on audiences. 1.2. The premise of Star Trek Voyager setup. Voyager follows a starship stranded in the Delta Quadrant, far from home, facing new and often dangerous alien species. Challenges for Voyager as a series. As a series, Voyager sought to balance its unique premise with paying homage to previous Star Trek entries, often borrowing key themes and story elements from TNG. Horror in Voyager. Though not typically viewed as a horror series, Voyager featured several terrifying episodes where characters faced psychological and existential fears. First terrifying element borrowed: mind control and parasitic beings. 2.1. The theme of mind control in TNG's Conspiracy. One of the most memorable early TNG episodes, where Starfleet officers are infiltrated and controlled by parasitic creatures. The idea of being controlled by an external entity is a common Sky-Fi horror trope, and this episode left a lasting mark on the series' portrayal of psychological horror. Psychological tension. The episode played on fears of mind control, loss of autonomy, and being overtaken by an unknown alien force. 2.2 Parallels in Voyager. The Killing Game. Plot overview. In this two-part episode, the Hirogen, an alien species, take over the Voyager crew's minds using advanced technology. They force the crew into violent simulations, stripping them of their identities and making them live in continuous battle scenarios. Borrowing the mind control theme. While the threat isn't parasitic like in TNG's Conspiracy, the Hirogen's control over the crew is a terrifying reflection of mind control. The crew is not only physically trapped, but mentally enslaved, which mirrors the horror of losing one's autonomy. Loss of identity and control. The psychological trauma faced by the Voyager crew in The Killing Game echoes the same terrifying sense of losing oneself that was presented in TNG's Conspiracy. 2.3. The fear of loss of self. A common Sky-Fi horror trope connection to real-world fears. The terror in both TNG's Conspiracy and Voyager's The Killing Game taps into deep human fears about autonomy, identity, and the violation of the mind. Cinematic and literary influences. Discuss how this theme appears in other science fiction works, such as Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and how Star Trek reflects broader cultural fears of mind control, manipulation, and parasitism. 3. Second terrifying element borrowed. Existential threats and survival. 3.1 Existential horror in TNG's The Best of Both Worlds. One of the most famous and terrifying existential threats in Star Trek history comes from the Borg. The idea of being assimilated and turned into a part of the Borg collective is an existential nightmare. This isn't just about survival, it's about losing one's soul to a greater, emotionless machine. TNG's other existential threats. Discuss additional TNG episodes where survival of the crew was uncertain and the moral or existential challenges presented by enemies like the Borg, Q, and alien species such as the crystalline entity. 3.2 Parallels in Voyager. Scorpion. Plot overview of Scorpion. This two-part episode introduces Voyager to species 8472, an alien race that poses an existential threat not just to the Voyager crew, but to the Borg and all life in the galaxy. These beings are immune to Borg assimilation and are bent on the destruction of everything in our dimension. Borrowing existential terror. Like TNG's encounters with the Borg, Voyager presents an existential challenge with species 8472. The Voyager crew must ally with the Borg to survive, echoing the same survival horror seen in The Best of Both Worlds.